Pandemic.
Good evening, I'm Joel Silverman, and if you're watching right now, you just saw our brand new fancy countdown video. So to those who have felt like they were frustrated that they might have missed the opening of the show, here we are. We are mastering technology as well as our craft as artists and writers. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. I'm here with a very special guest. I am thrilled to have David Slack. He is a writer, a producer, an executive producer, a show creator, a member of the Writers Guild board, though he won't be able to talk about any negotiations that may be ongoing. Doesn't mean that we won't try. And he's an all-around great and very funny guy. You also may know him from Twitter, where he somehow has more followers than almost any other writer that I know. And I'll ask about how he made his online presence so large and entertaining as well. I remember when I first connected with him, it was like, wow, I'm really talking to Slack to the future. So before we do that, I do want to say a few quick words from our sponsor or sponsors, Roadmap Writers and Notes for Execs. Roadmap Writers is an online writer education platform hosted by working industry executives. If you're looking for a real-world solution to help develop, market, and sell your script, visit roadmapwriters.com to learn more. I'm going to be able to say that by heart, probably within the next couple of days. Notes for Execs is a company that guides working entertainment executives on how to give better and more effective creative notes. Now they are opening their doors to writers as well, who can learn a lot about their own writing through learning about the notes giving process. Visit them at notesforexecs.com. So thank you very much to Notes for Execs and Roadmap Writers. And thank you to David Slack, who we will be joining right now. David,
hey, good. How are you, Joel?
I'm doing all right. Did you see that little transition we just did there?
It's really slick. It's really, really slick. I like it.
Thank you. So shout out to StreamYard, our streaming provider, who has brought up our technical game dramatically. David, how are you holding up in the quarantine?
We're okay. Our families are okay. My wife had the foresight to decide that we should start a garden right before this got crazy. And I got to tell you, seeing little shoots of green come up is helping us stay sane. And French breakfast radishes, you can eat the whole damn thing. You can eat the radish part. The greens are great for salad. So I don't know. It's an apocalypse. What do you want? And it's been, just if you're a writer out there and you're having a hard time getting into that place that you need to get into to write, I want you to know that you are not alone. It's been really, really difficult to find that creative space. Things that aren't super creative, I've been able to focus on, but writing has been really difficult. I'm pressing forward like everybody else, but it's tough. But in terms of safety and everything, we're okay.
Well, I'm glad that you're dealing with the same problem that I am there, because I have to say I've been super duper productive on all of the emails and the non-writing things associated with writing, but actually sitting down and writing a script has been harder in the last few weeks than I think at any other point that
I've known for years that like writing is, you're sort of looking for a trance state. I described it once as like 1% inspiration, 99% sitting around waiting for my brain to work right. And getting into that state that your brain has to be in to really be productive as a writer, when there's these daily briefings and the numbers keep going up, and it could take 4 hours to get basic stuff from the store, and then you don't know if it's safe to bring your mail into your house. It's really made it weird, and it's also, I do mostly grounded science fiction, so we're living in the kind of shit that I write, and that makes you think really hard about the realities that you're imagining. So it's fucking weird, man.
I'm glad that we're on
the same. I can swear, right? That's okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Otherwise, we're fucked.
We should add that to the little pre-show meeting that we have with guests, because that comes up almost every night. Somebody goes, "Can I swear?"
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
it was
yeah.
fun to have that on the air. Well, so I'm curious, because you have done a lot of genre stuff,
Yeah.
and you actually have gone back and forth a lot to animation,
Yeah.
which a lot of people, they're one or the other. And, or I should say, a lot of people, once they start doing live action, the money's better, and they end up mostly doing live action. I don't know as many folks.
That's undoubtedly true. The money in live action is better. If the money was the same, I might still be doing animation. I thoroughly enjoyed doing animation, and still some of the highlights of my career are things that happened while I was working on Teen Titans or Jackie Chan Adventures. But that was where I got my start. And, my philosophy about a career in Hollywood is, well, anywhere else in your life. Like if you're going on vacation, back when that was a thing we could do, you want to be real specific about what you want. You want to know your flight number. You want to know what airport you're landing in and what hotel you're staying at. Your career in this business is just hitchhiking. It's just who's going west. So when I got out to LA, the first job that I got was as a production secretary on the Men in Black cartoon show. And I kind of worked my way up, and, was out for a while and worked other jobs, and then got a job as Dwayne Capizzi's assistant. And Dwayne was running the Men in Black cartoon show, and Dwayne gave me my first shot as a writer. He and I and his wife Linnea and my wife Katie, we just had Zoom drinks last week, so it was great to catch up. But so Dwayne gave me my first shot, and it was just this really wonderful opportunity, and it's funny because as I started doing that, I mentioned to, a number of friends that, like, hey, if this is something you want to do, write a sample, and, maybe I can help you find work. And I had one guy say to me, like, yeah, I don't want to get pigeonholed. I don't know where he is now, but the one friend who really took me up on it has an Emmy now. And that's Rob Hoagie. So, it's really, I just seized that opportunity. But then as I moved on into prime time, I still loved working in animation. So when I had a little space, when opportunity presented, I would keep doing it. So I went from Teen Titans to Law and Order, and I can tell you, story is story is story. The stories work in different ways. You have to draw from a different place, but breaking story is breaking story. And I'm as proud of the stuff that I wrote in cartoons as the things that I've written in prime time.
Well, especially because for me, I was a genre fan before I knew what that was. The first show that I was just obsessed with that I can remember was the original Ghostbusters cartoon show, which puts a precise date on how old I am, I realize, as I say that. I also had the privilege, his widow may still be watching, of meeting and getting to know David Wise, who created a bunch of those animated shows that I grew up on, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle animated show.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I don't think I ever met David, but I knew his name, and I think I worked with some of the Turtles at some point. Because the voiceover artists, like, they're, incredibly talented people. And if you hang out long enough and work in that, you're going to meet, like, we had June Foray in to do a voice on Teen Titans. Tony Kaye came in, like, just these legendary voiceover people, Maurice LaMarche, I can't remember any more names right now. Tara Strong, Hendon Walsh, Corey Payton, Scott Menville, Craig Sipes, just really, really talented people. And it's a lot of the same people. D. Bradley Baker, who can sound like any monster ever. He's like a whole VFX or sound effects machine in a person.
Well, it's also really good to have friends who are voice actors as well, because then when you need somebody to say the name of your show, your low budget, no budget web show, sexy voice like PENdemic.
Yes, totally.
Hey, you just recorded that for me.
Yeah.
And the person who did that may be watching and may identify herself. But so that's really interesting that there's a thing there about taking the opportunity that's presented to you, even if it doesn't look like what you thought you wanted or what you dreamed of.
I will tell you a story about that. When I was an assistant, when I was Dwayne's assistant, we were in an animatic screening. And if you don't work in animation, an animatic is they write the script, you do a record, you send the radio play, the audio of the record to the artists, and they draw a storyboard. And then you take the storyboard and you kind of shoot it. Back then we would shoot it on videotape. Now it's all scanned. And you put it with the voices. And so you're sort of watching an animated, semi-animated storyboard version of the show, which never looks great. But if you know animation, you can, make decisions about it. So we're in an animatic screening at about 9:30 at night. And I'm exhausted and I don't want to be there. And kind of looking down, my nose at the whole thing at this point. I'm just having a rough night of like, hi, what are we doing? It's late at night, it's just a cartoon show. And the director, Chuck Deswa, gets up and he's jumping around the room at 9:30 at night, explaining why this scene is going to be cool. And I felt just totally shamed by that moment, because in that moment I was looking at him and I'm like, well, that's why he has that job and that's why I have this job. And I realized that he's the one, I don't even think I ever told him this, he's the one who taught me that anything that's great is great because somebody decided to make it that way. And it does not matter what it is. It's like a land grab thing. Like you could run all over trying to look for the best plot of land, but I think the people who do best are the ones who have grabbed the land that's in front of them and then farm the hell out of it. And that's what he was doing. And I sort of took that to heart, and any opportunity that came my way, I just, busted my ass on it to try and make it great. And that's worked out pretty well.
Wow. I love that grab the land that you can get and farm the shit out of it. That's a book.
Never look down your nose at your own work at any opportunity. Like the good job is the one you can get. I've watched a lot of people strategize themselves, and I've done this a little bit myself as I've gotten further along in my career, but I've watched a lot of people strategize themselves out of some great opportunities.
Yeah, I now I'm running through my head and thinking, was there a plot of land that I could have farmed that I didn't?
This is what I'm here. I'm here to make you lie awake at night and question your life choices. That's what I'm trying to do.
Well, the reality is that I'm going to be doing that more or less anyway. This just puts more substance to the existential dread.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
Well, so I am curious, because I think that most people don't end up starting doing Teen Titans, or I'm sorry, which one was it that the first animated?
The first show I wrote for was The Big Guy and Rusty the Boy Robot, which is
Teen Titans would have been much later then, right?
Titans was the last big thing I did in animation, but yeah, Big Guy and Rusty was actually a Frank Miller comic book that had Jeff Darrow, who did the design work on The Matrix, doing the art. It was kind of Iron Man meets Astro Boy. It was really fun. It's a hard show to find because it kind of got buried in some shifting business sands. But I did that while I was still working as Dwayne's assistant. I did 7 episodes. We had a great time doing that. Had a fantastic cast: Pam Adlon, Stephen Root, M. Emmett Walsh, which was amazing for me. Gabrielle Carteris, and that was a wonderful show. And then I did a lot of work on Jackie Chan Adventures. I think I did like 23 of those. And I had like over 100 credits in animation. I was just like making about the least you could and be a writer in Hollywood. And I was just making it up in volume. Like I'd work on 20 scripts a year if I could.
Well, I'm reminded actually that the first produced script, and I'm not going to out this person, but he's a showrunner level writer now. A friend of mine, his first produced script was a softcore porn script for Showtime late at night, written under a pseudonym.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And
nothing wrong with that. Did they pay him?
They sure did.
Well, then great. You're a writer.
And then 15 years later, because he wrote one episode that, and by the way, I don't in any way mean to equate animation with porn, though I have.
I mean, if you go to Comic-Con, it's all on the same table. So
pretty much, that's true. It's a good point. But he had this opportunity. He was an assistant at Showtime. It was not something that anybody was aiming to write, and he just said, "Yeah, I'm totally gonna do." And he wrote a porn episode that was actually quite funny and engaging.
Yeah.
And they were just like, well, yeah, fine. It still has the TNA that we're looking for. And then he wrote another one that was too clever and engaging. And they were like, this is too much. Like, this is,
Yeah.
you have to dumb this down. And then he actually got another job and moved on. But 15 years later into his career, after he'd already been an EP on some show, and he had a reading of those two scripts.
That's amazing.
That somebody in the audience saw and went, "This is amazing," and hooked him up with a theater producer, and they did it at the Edinburgh Fringe.
Oh my God, that's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah, no, it's, I mean, my motto starting out was, I'll write copy machine instructions if you pay me. Like, I just want to get paid to write.
Right.
So, you know, like any job writing was, I mean, it was this or the counter at Blockbuster for me. And like, Blockbuster's closed now. So I just got to keep fooling people into paying me for making shit up.
Well, so I'm curious, because you come out here and you start, you're working as an assistant, you're getting into animation that way. I want to find out how you transitioned from only doing animation to also doing live action and to doing Law and Order. But before we get there, I kind of want to know a little bit, like, let's flash back as we do in any good pilot. Now that we've got the first act, let's flash back and like, what is your origin story?
I grew up in Dallas. Yeah, I grew up in Dallas, Texas, which is, you know, lovely in its own way. I always felt like a bit of an alien there. And then I wound up, like, I was determined to leave, and then I wound up staying for college. I went to SMU because they had a really fantastic theater program, and I got a scholarship, so that helped. That was really, you know, that's the first time I remember vividly being in a room with, it was only about 32 people in my class in the theater program. And I remember being in a room with a bunch of them, like in the early nights, where we would like had to do these monologues, and we were practicing at one guy's house, and because he was also from Dallas. And it was the first time I felt like I was with my people. And to this day, many of them remain good friends. Not just the people from my year. There's a successful writer right here named Allison Moore who was in that room with me then. She and I went to SMU. Kari Payton, who was on The Walking Dead, was one of my college classmates. David Schulner, who created and runs New Amsterdam, and Aaron Ginsberg, who works with him. Wade McIntyre, Brian Baumgartner from The Office. Amy Acker came on after the bunch of us. So it was really a really phenomenal thing for me. And I still draw on lessons that I got from the professors there at that time. And then I graduated college, and it was sort of the heyday of independent film. So tried and failed to make an independent movie with other friends of mine who are out here, Nathan Amundsen, who's a set designer, and Eric Hayden, who works in VFX. Eric and I just talked earlier today. Couldn't figure out how to quite get the movie made. They were like, I'm aging myself here, but they were literally shooting Bottle Rocket on the other side of town while we were not. And so after a few years, came out to LA and just started out. This is the first job I could get. My ex, she wasn't my ex at the time, but she was working on King of the Hill, and she passed my resume off to her boss, who passed it off to his girlfriend. And I think the first job I got in LA was through a temp agency working for Fox Sports Latin America, because I speak Spanish okay, not great, but and then the second job I got was as a production secretary on Men in Black. And so then I just, you know, I was what was I? I was the coordinator of finance at Fox Searchlight Pictures for a while. I funded, I put the money in the accounts to shoot Waking Ned Devine. So yeah,
made a lot of money back. So
yeah. No, I take full responsibility for it. But yeah, so I, you know, did the assistant thing and found my way up, and it was, you know, very fortunate. Worked really hard, but yeah, I think that's the origin story, other than just, you know, being weird. You know, like that's. Like, I think
being weird.
I don't know. I think well, look. I mean, we're storytellers. Storytellers, if you go back in time, way, way, way back in time, those are the people who, like, everybody else is like asleep in the cave, and you're the asshole who's up mashing up berries to like paint on the wall of the cave of the hunt that you did that day so that people will remember. And I don't know why we do that, but there aren't a bunch of us. And so it's a strange way to grow up, that you have that need to do this thing that other people are happy to consume, but they don't have that same need. So
what do you think put that into you? Not to put you on the spot or
that's something I've discussed at length with various therapists, and when I get the answer, I'll let you know.
Fair enough. Well, so you end up going in doing Law and Order. And, And so I'm going to put to one side the origin part, and now I want to do a little forward momentum into Law and Order and how you say that it's very similar. The animation, the Law and Order story is story, breaking story is breaking story. But what if anything was different, and how did that transition feel?
It was terrifying. So I was running Teen Titans, co-running it with Glenn Murakami. Really, really great experience from the top down, like just a wonderful, wonderful time. And I think it was in between season 3 and 4. I had an opportunity to develop a show with Suzanne Daniels, who's now running YouTube. But at the time, she had a pod. And so I had this idea, and we developed the show, and then her deal at that point was over at Fox, and Fox wouldn't even meet with me without a sample script. So I sat down and like very quickly wrote a Shield spec, because that was, a show I really liked at the time. And that was back when you didn't need to write an original pilot, when you could spec an existing show.
It's funny, Sean was on a couple days ago and was talking about the Shield and that experience, and we talked a little bit about the transition that's happened.
Yeah, it's an amazing show. It's genuinely like it's like Buffy. It should be required viewing. Like all of the anti-heroes, I think flow from Vic Mackey and Tony Soprano. But so I wrote this Shield spec, and unbeknownst to me, Suzanne had passed it off to an agent. And this guy so in between season 3 and 4 of Teen Titans, this guy, Bob Goomer, starts calling me. And I thought he was just looking for work for his clients. So I didn't return the call immediately. And he finally got me on the phone, and he said, "No, David, I want to represent you. I think you could work in prime time." And so that started my relationship with Bob, who he has since retired. Hi, Bob, if you're watching. He's a wonderful agent. We still get coffee and get dinner, but he's retired. He teaches law at Pepperdine now, and enjoys, hopefully, still a lot of golf, although I guess he probably can't golf right now. I need to text Bob. But anyway, so he very patiently spent like a year breaking me in prime time. And I had a number of opportunities. I did one day of a writer's room on Global Frequency that John Rogers created. It was like me, Ben Edlund, and Diego Gutierrez and John in a room breaking episodes for this show that never happened. But then Bob sent me in for a meeting on Law and Order one day with Peter Jankowski, who's the president of Wolf Films. And I thought, okay, Alias or Smallville, that would make sense. But Law and Order, this will be a very pleasant waste of time. And I went in, and Peter had 2 boys, and who are probably grown now, but he watched Teen Titans with them. So he just starts talking about Robin and Raven and Starfire and Cyborg and Beast Boy. And I'm just like, so then he set me up for a meeting with the showrunner at the time, who was Eric Overmyer, who I had studied in school, because he's a brilliant writer and also a famous playwright. And I got that opportunity. So honestly, that was, I think, a testament to what a really good agent can do for you. because that was not a door that I knew how to open or would have ever known how to open. But it also kind of shows that something else I've learned is that every script has a life of its own. I wrote that shield spec for a specific purpose so Suzanne could get me in the door with Fox, and by the time I got it done, she had already moved on. But she passed it off to Bob, and that started my career in prime time. So that's the beauty of spec writing. Is as hard as it is, spec writing is I really think the hardest type of writing there is. But when you write those things, you never know what doors they're going to open.
Yeah, and it helps to pass your script around. It's always such a thing. You have to be so ginger about it, because you never want to be that person who's always saying, you should read my script, you should read my script. But
yes.
When you have relationships with people, it's useful to just say, hey, you know what? No big deal, but if you have a minute, check this out. Let me know what you think.
Yeah.
Because you never know when that's going to be the person who ends up saying, you know what, you should talk to so-and-so. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's a very hard needle to thread. But it's, when you send a script out, it's more than once I've found out that somebody read it and I didn't even know they were going to read it, and it, made good things happen. So,
well, you can also know that your work is doing really well when people voluntarily want to forward it to other people. When you don't have to ask, when they just go, can I send this to some people?
Yeah, that's always nice. That doesn't always. I've written some things that didn't happen with, but
we all have.
Yeah, that's the job.
Yeah, and so then you find yourself in Law and Order, and you're looking around this room with the people who are there.
Let me stop you there. What room? Law and Order didn't have a writer's room.
Interesting.
Yeah, no, I was terrified when I got that job, because I got the offer. I have a
friend that wrote a freelance for them relatively recently. I didn't realize that they were effectively still all freelances.
Well, I don't know about SVU. SVU, I think, does run a room, because since War in the Light took over many years ago, I'm not sure if Warren's still the day-to-day showrunner, but that show moved to New York and ran, I think, a different way. But Law and Order, when I was on it, was what you call independent study, which was fine with me, because that's what I'd been doing in animation for years. I mean, I lived in Santa Barbara for 3 years while I was writing Jackie Chan and Teen Titans. I just, had an apartment. I was putting my ex through Brooks Institute of Photography. And I just worked alone. If I couldn't figure it out, I'd email Dwayne or call him, or, go walk around the block. But so that part wasn't weird, but the law part and the order part were terrifying. And also coming into a show that had well over 100 episodes. When I got the job, I sat down and I probably watched 5 or 6 hours of Law and Order a day for over a month to prepare for that show. And got to where I thought I could understand pretty well, but still, my degree's in fucking theater. I don't know anything about law. And I got Black's Law Dictionary, and they had legal consultants on the show who were really helpful. And a friend of mine from high school had gone on to clerk for Sandra Day O'Connor, so I called him up. And I'm like, where are the cliff notes for this shit? There's got to be cliff notes for law school. And he's like, no, really, you just have to go to law school. I'm like, fuck you. And he's like, well, I guess there's the Nutshell series. There are totally cliff notes for law school. The Nutshell series, it's in a nutshell. There's criminal law in a nutshell, criminal procedure in a nutshell. They're a bit of a dense read, but it's better than 3 to 6 years of your life. So I just studied my ass off, but so I was really scared, but I started out there, and there wasn't room. The people were nice to me. Like Greg Plageman, who later became my boss, would kind of check in and see how I was doing. And when Richard Swearing was out, he'd look after me. But I was sitting in my office, off to break this episode of the show on my own, and really, really, really flummoxed. And then there was just this moment where I was like, oh, their police powers are their superpowers. Got it. And then I just, but that was really that moment where I sort of realized that stories basically all work the same. They're all mysteries about how you get from one state to another. And the tools that create that change vary by genre, and the things that are at stake vary by genre. But the basic mechanisms of story are really, really similar. And hopefully you don't get into too much of a rut with the way you tell stories. But and I think that's one thing I've been really fortunate about, is that because I've hopped genres, I've had to learn new things. And that, by the way, I'm rambling, but that was one of the great things about working in animation. When you write a kids show, you really wind up writing all genres. By the time I was 3 or 4 years into my career, I'd done horror, I'd done broad comedy, I'd done rom-com, I'd done straight up mystery, I'd done action comedy. Most other shows that you write for in prime time, you're sticking in a much narrower zone, but something about animation is a little bit more about genre hopping.
Right. That's interesting. I think about when the first shows that I liked, there was the first live action show that I fell in love with as a kid. Again, I'm totally putting a clock on exactly how old I am, was Star Trek: The Next Generation. And coming back and watching it now.
That was the show that made me want to be a TV writer.
And it's interesting. That was the show that made me aware that there were TV writers.
Yeah.
And then the show that I went, oh, I want to write this, was Babylon 5 a few
years ago.
But with Star Trek: The Next Generation, I've gone back and been watching a little bit during the quarantine. It's a little bit like Campbell's Soup comfort food.
Totally.
TV. And it's amazing how that show completely switches genre episode to episode.
Yes.
Where, like, this episode, we're doing a comedy. This episode's a political allegory. This episode we're going to go back to Sherwood Forest. Why? Well, we've got the set, and I feel like that's something we may have lost a little bit in the era of television taking itself more seriously, is the ability to go in all kinds of directions on a show. Yeah,
I mean, Javi Grillo Markswatch was tweeting last night. I think it was last night. Maybe it was this morning. I don't know. Days don't have meaning. But Javi was tweeting about how he's sick of hearing about elevated genre. Like, he just wants some, cheap fucking sci-fi, and I'm totally there with him. I really, really, I love, I really enjoyed The Outsider on HBO, that just sort of dropped genre. Tales from the Loop feels like it was fucking made just for me. I know that it wasn't. I've worked on that with my shrink, but I love it genuinely, and it's so smart and thoughtful and emotional. But not everything has to be fancy. There's a thing, like, even the term genre bothers me a little bit, because, like, romantic comedy is a genre. I did a season on Lie to Me. And one of the things that taught me is that the use of the word genre, when you mean science fiction or fantasy, is distancing language. Distancing language, the classic example is Clinton. I did not have sex with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. He's not saying the term. He's trying to push her away from him. People use the term genre because they don't want to be a nerd. They're afraid of science fiction and fantasy. Well, there's a shit ton of money in science fiction and fantasy, and I like it. So, like, that it's not only just as a pedant that the term genre is imprecise, but it's also like, hey, don't be afraid of this thing that's going to make us both a lot of money and make a bunch of people happy. I forget what my point was. Oh, thank you, Tiffany. Stuff like that makes my day. Thank you.
It's funny that you say that, because I've been thinking a lot, and I've said it in a couple of these conversations when genre comes up, but I think that you'll particularly appreciate that genre stuff. When you look back at the stories that last throughout time, you look at the biggest box office movies, you look at the movies that we still watch. Like, what is the only movie from the 1930s, from the era of the talkie, the dawn of the talkie, that people will still watch outside of a classroom? The only one, Wizard of Oz.
Yep.
Genre movie.
Yep.
Go back beyond that, all the Victorian novels. There were hundreds, thousands of Victorian novels. What are the only ones that we read outside of your high school English class? H.G. Wells.
Yeah.
Those kinds of
Mary Shelley. Yeah, like, but
yeah, Mary Shelley. I mean, we're compressing 150 years here, but Mary Shelley, H.G. Wells, Dracula, genre. And then you go back and you're like, well, wait a minute. What is the Bible if not a genre story? And like, oh, okay, like there's totally a version of this I can imagine where you had like some basic history that was being written. I know I'm being totally sacrilegious, and somebody read it and they're like, yeah, people don't like history. They find history very boring. Could you like spice it up and like maybe there's like, and like the sea parts, it magically parts because he's got this rod and God is with him. Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, we can work with that. Okay, I'll take the note. And I think that there's something profound there. And so last year when Scorsese was talking about the Marvel movies not being cinema, I'm like, that's true if you define cinema to mean what he says that it means, and that makes sense. But the Marvel movies, as far as I can tell, are taking the place of religion.
Well, it's a mass medium. Movies are for everybody, you know. So like, I mean, Martin Scorsese is a gifted filmmaker. I haven't liked everything that he's made, but I think he's done some brilliant stuff. But if every movie was like a Scorsese film, we'd be, Tracy. But if every movie was like a Scorsese film, we'd be missing out on a lot of stuff. And I think Joseph Campbell, you know, problematic as he is as a person, but Joseph Campbell and, you know, the myth of the hero, I think would recognize a lot more classic storytelling in, you know, the Marvel movies than in The Irishman. And again, this is, you know, nothing against, Martin Scorsese or movies like that. There's absolutely, you know, that's the thing is it's for everybody. It doesn't have to be one thing. That's the joy of it. My favorite things are when somebody figures out how to come along and do something new. You know, when you see a movie like Parasite, I flipped out when I saw Parasite, not just because it's an incredibly good movie, but because I don't know what it's a rewrite of. Like, almost everything you see, you're like, oh, okay, so it's Scorpion from the 1970s, which is really just Wages of Fear from the 50s, you know, or this or that. You can always, if you really know cinema and TV and movies and stuff, you can identify what it's drawing from. I don't know what Parasite is. It's a new story. He made a new story. Like, that's amazing. People don't do that. You know, and some of the stuff that Taika Waititi is doing is, like, you know, not just Jojo Rabbit, but like Hunt for the Wilder People. There are things that they resonate with, but it's not a ripoff. And that's in a 100 years into an industry that has, by its very nature, kept permanent records of itself. That's really something to pull off, coming up with something new and to have something new to say. So, you know, that's the stuff that I get excited about. Like, I don't want everybody to make TV like I make TV, or make movies like the movies that I've already seen that I love. Although I would not object to more movies that are like the ones that I've loved, you know, like.
Of course. Well, that's one of the things that's so exciting, I think, too, about serialized TV, is that for the first time ever in human history, we can dramatize in a really long form. And there was always kind of a limit on how long you could, or novelize, I should say, dramatize the novel. Yeah. There was always a limit. You could do a soap opera that was always ongoing and had no real start and no real end, or you could do something that maxed out at about 8 to 10 hours. But there is the possibility now to play with form in a whole new way. And there are some shows that are just starting to reach out and do that. And I think that that's a really exciting moment for the medium of television.
Oh yeah, no, it's a fascinating time to work in TV, because you can kind of do anything, and that's more true with every passing day. But it's, you know, I mean, my big formative TV memories. You were talking about my origin story. I watched a ton of TV as a kid. I probably watched 7 hours of TV a night. Like, I would come home, I'd do my homework right away, and then I would sit in front of the TV and I would soak it up. You know, and I remember the things that really stuck out to me were the things that weren't supposed to happen. Like I remember just one time they went on and they're like, "This is ABC breaking news," and then they just cut to Jessica Savage combing her hair. No one had told her she was on, and she was just like, and it was, this was the 80s. She was probably on there for like a minute before anybody fixed the problem. And I happened to actually be watching TV live the night that there was a show called Fridays that was like Saturday Night Live, but on Fridays, and Andy Kaufman was on it. And the moment was dramatized in the Man on the Moon biopic that they made. But I was watching live when Andy Kaufman started talking about the script being shit, and the writer came in off camera and attacked him. So like my favorite things are things where it feels like something's gone horribly wrong with my television. And to a certain extent, that's the kind of stuff that I'm trying to make. That's why, with working with Jonah Nolan and Greg Plageman on Person of Interest, I hit a bunch of secret codes in Person of Interest. So as far as I know, nobody's cracked the last set, but that's another story.
Well, I love how with Person of Interest, you guys took something that started as like, let's slip this in the back door as a procedural, and then we're going to build it out into the craziest freaking show you've ever seen. And
Jonah had for that show and for everything he works on, enormous vision, and then it was a great writing staff. It was a wonderful team. It was fantastic to be part of. I think everybody on that staff is still a friend of mine, and we worked closely together and came up with stuff that we were all really proud of. And but the sort of like that whole like overarching vision of where it went. I mean, like, I think we helped realize that, but credit where it's due. Jonah came in the door with like knowing where he wanted, to go. And as far as I know, it's the only science fiction show that ever became true while it was still being written. Like I remember, I think it was in the middle of season 3, the Edward Snowden news broke. And I got really depressed for like 2 weeks because I was like, wait, have I been part of like a government conspiracy to normalize this shit so that when it came out, people wouldn't mind? Because that was really the only thing we got wrong, was that nobody gave a shit that we were all being surveilled, which I still find horrifying, which is, why my passwords are as long as they are.
Well, as all of the folks in the audience now start trying to figure out your passwords, I am way overdue to take a... Sorry, say that again?
I'm talking to the people trying to figure out my passwords. You won't guess them. They're too long.
Well, I want to take a quick break. I'm way overdue, I realize, to do a quick sponsorship break. This is TV. We have commercials. Amazing. So I'm going to hop over and do that, and then we'll be right back to ask more questions about everything in cinema, because we've really touched on every possible topic, and I want to follow up on all of it. So just one moment.
All right.
As we go to the single frame. And I have been told that I ramble on a little too much in these ad breaks because I am at the same time talking about a sponsor, I am talking about friends of mine. So I'm not going to just riff on how great these folks are. I'm just going to read the text as written, and then you can find out for yourself when you go to their websites how great they are. So Roadmap Writers is a screenwriting education platform for writers looking for a guided path to success. Programs are hosted online by working industry executives and are designed to empower writers with actionable tools to elevate their craft and cultivate industry relationships. Since 2016, Roadmap has helped more than 113 writers sign to representation, and many others get staffed, optioned, or sell their scripts. Among those 113 are some friends of mine. I couldn't resist one ad lib. To learn more, visit roadmapwriters.com and use code PENDEMIC to save $15. Roadmap Writers, the road to your screenwriting success starts here. And for Notes for Execs is a company that guides working entertainment executives on how to give better and more effective creative notes. Now they're opening their doors to writers as well, who can learn a lot about their own writing through learning about the notes giving process. Find out what all of the fuss is about at notesforexecs.com. And I said that fuss is about like it was in the script, but that was also an ad lib. And frankly, Dan, who runs it, would have written a better line than I came up with off the top of my head. So I can't play like that was them. So notesforexecs.com, roadmapwriters.com. Thanks to both. They allow me to hire somebody to go and edit all of these videos and turn them into highlight reels and so forth. That will be forthcoming soon. I think across all platforms, definitely on YouTube. So I believe that in the industry, that is now what's known as premium content. So thanks everybody for checking those places out. And welcome back, David.
Here I am.
I'm a ham?
I said, here I am.
Oh, well, I'm also a ham. So
good ad. I liked it.
Thank you. Well, so it's interesting. I'd love to go back to the notion of genre and elevated genre and unelevated genre. I agree with you. I just think of it. Thanks very much. This is my producer, Tasha Cerny, clarifying I am a ham. She has to deal, and a handful, she has to deal with me all the time. But so I'm wondering, you've worked in a lot of different kinds of genre shows that have ranged from really out there mythology to really kind of grounded, elevated type sci-fi. I would say that I would say Person of Interest is almost, it's the network version of elevated sci-fi in a way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. We were quietly kind of making, or not that quietly all the time, because we did pretty well for, you know, most of our run, but we were, you know, making a dense, thought-provoking science fiction show that was heavily serialized, and, you know, CBS, to their credit, let us, which was great. Not without some reservations, but, you know, it was very much, you know, it was before the streaming services had really come along. So it was in that period where network was trying to figure out how much of what cable was doing that they could sort of capture and embrace. Because it's, you know, it's a tricky problem for the networks to have a heavily serialized show, particularly on a network with CBS, with an audience that is a little bit more there for a single serving TV. Right.
Well, it's definitely something where you started out with a show that brought my mom along. I remember, and she is not somebody who's into that weird stuff. My dad and I were always the ones who watched that, and then over time it was just gradual enough that she was still hooked. And I remember watching, I think it was the penultimate episode. I just remember there was a long scene with I'm blanking on the actor name, but Ben Linus monologue.
Oh yeah. Michael Emerson.
Yes.
Which, by the way, if you're not watching Evil, he's delightful on it. He plays a terrible person, and it's wonderful. And he's the kindest.
He's amazing.
Michael is the sweetest man.
He was just talking to a computer in a room for like the whole act. I will tell you. My mother going, "Are you really watching this?" With like a little bit of shock and amazement, but she was into it.
I will tell you a couple of things about that. One is that Jonah would always say, you never want to go full sci-fi in TV. And I found that to be valuable guidance, particularly in network. Like, you know, as great a show as Battlestar Galactica is, and I loved it, like seriously one of my favorite shows in the last 20 years, it was a little bit hard to get people who weren't into science fiction to come in the door. Whereas if it's just people walking around with a little thing in their ear and talking about a machine, maybe you get people who would otherwise be afraid of spaceships to watch that. But when we wrapped out the library set, because we ultimately burned that set down in the continuity of the show, Michael Pitt, who was the first AD on that episode, and fantastic first AD, but he actually read off the page counts of the number of pages Michael Emerson had gotten through in the library, because there would be whole days that was just Michael talking to a screen, recording his half. I mean, the entire show was intercut phone calls, and Michael could do incredible empathetic work without a scene partner. I'm sure. I know that his favorite stuff was obviously when he was in a room with somebody, but the guy's incredible. I'd watched him put, I think they sent him a new scene one day with very little warning. I watched the guy just put like 9 pages in his head in like a half hour in between scenes, like unreal. And again, the sweetest guy. There are 2 types of people who are really good at playing villains. People who are actual villains and people who are incredibly, incredibly kind. And Michael's the latter.
Well, yeah, I want to go. It's funny. I'm thinking in my head of 2 questions, but really, I want to talk a little bit about world building. I want to acknowledge that great actors. It takes a great actor to work alone in a room and make it work. And when you see actors doing that, it is just a total magic trick. As amazing to me as somebody writing a great script or painting an amazing portrait. Like, it doesn't, even if the script is great, an actor can still take it to an entirely different level.
Oh, yeah.
But this show is primarily about writing, and one of the things that I know you're really familiar with is world building.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, what is universal to you in good world building across different kinds of shows? And how do you go about world building and thinking about it? Because, you've done things, whether in live action or animation, from huge worlds that you're creating essentially from scratch to things like Person of Interest, where you're tweaking a thing at a time, or MacGyver, which also involves world building, but of a different kind.
You use duct tape.
Right. That's the word.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's funny. I had not thought about world building enormously. I mean, somebody called me that, a producer, Jason Eganberg, who I've sold 2 shows with. We're going for 3 now. But he called me a world builder for the first time like a year ago or something. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's cool. But I didn't have a lot of friends as a kid, so I would play alone in my room a lot, like with Legos and Star Wars figures. And so maybe that's, where that comes from, but it's something that I love to do, and there's a logic to it that, it's sort of, there's a thing that, supposedly Michelangelo used to say. I never met him, but he said, the sculpture's in the marble, I just have to find it. And that's something I've thought about a lot throughout my career as a writer, that the story really tells you how to tell the story. And, if the thing about world building is that in the real world, in our actual universe, there's one theory in physics that if you got one particle and you knew its, you couldn't know this because Heisenberg, but if you knew its spin, its velocity, its position, if you knew all of those things, then you could maybe start to extrapolate back from that and build out the entire universe from that single particle. My degree, again, is in theater, so I'm not sure how true that is in physics, but in screenwriting and TV writing, it's absolutely true that, you take what you know and you think about what that tells you about what you don't know. And because the best answers are the ones that feel real, and not real in a way necessarily that's predictable, because that's obviously, you want stories with a lot of conflict. But like the thing that leaps to mind, some world building that I guess I did a good job on, because they ultimately wound up making the show. I wrote the series guide for The Dark Crystal years and years ago when we were trying to sell it as an animated series. And it ultimately became the Netflix series. And thanks to the Writers Guild, I got a credit on that, which I was very happy about. So I did the early work constructing, the 7 tribes of Gelfling and how that world worked and what the world was like, 1,000 trying ago when the Skeksis were younger and stronger, and what Gelfling culture was like. And, you just start with the pieces that you have and you think about it and look for the things that create conflict that feels true. And I guess I would say the other thing that's really important about world building is that the only worlds that are interesting to us are worlds that speak to our own. I mean, the thing I love about science fiction is that it's about now, and particularly writing science fiction for kids when I was working in cartoons. I mean, the season finale, the first season of Teen Titans, is about a custody battle. And if I had sat down with a generation of kids and said, okay, I want to talk about when your parents get divorced and they're fighting about who goes with who, they would have shut down. They don't want to hear that from me. I mean, fucking look at me. Like those kids, you know, like they don't want to hear that from some grown up. But when you tell them a story about Slade or Deathstroke, depending on your flavor of DC, trying to take Robin away from his friends and making it so that he can't visit them anymore, well, then you're accessing these really complicated emotions that those kids don't have anywhere to put. And I've had that experience of watching shows that are accessing something inside me that I don't even understand what it is until much later. I mean, that to me, that was the power of Law and Order, that you'd hear about some like a home invasion robbery and you'd always be a little nervous. And then you'd watch Law and Order and you'd see, oh, they got the guy. Okay, good. You know, and by the time there's a trial, you're asleep. You know, but so I think there's a lot of value in stories that speak to the world that we're living through now. So yeah, I don't know. I guess I just kind of look around for who the characters are that I can feel them out there, but they haven't told me their names yet. And you know, you build that stuff out but then to be totally honest, there's a certain part of it that's just like, I just make shit up. I've just always made shit up. And, you know, and I think most writers have this experience that it's like there's a radio in your head that you don't quite know how to turn on or off, and you're not very good at tuning, but you hear it. And other people don't hear the music. They don't have that radio. And you can spend, you know, many, many years of your life learning how to understand the music that you're hearing and learning how to translate it into something that other people can enjoy. But I don't know where that shit comes from. I mean, arguably it's your subconscious, but yeah. Did I ramble long enough?
The rambling was fascinating. And I do, folks in the audience, I see your questions and I do want to, oh wow, we're at 7 o'clock already. I didn't even quite realize.
I will do that. I will talk your ear off.
Well, it's a pleasure. So I want to do a question from the audience before we go. And I'm going to try and insist that I can bring you back at some point in the future, because I feel like we could just riff on this stuff forever.
That'd be great.
But the very first guest that I had, it was technically a test episode, is a friend of mine who is a writer and who talks about, in an almost spiritual sense, what you were saying with the radio, that a story chooses you, mm-hmm. and you become its person. Yeah. And you have to like maintain your relationship and your loyalty to it. And that doesn't mean that you can't bring other people's views into your relationship with it, but like any kind of relationship, you need to stay true to that story, because you're its person and it shows you.
And that by the way, is also the key to a healthy writer's room. Like we all work for the story. You know, we all work for the showrunner too. Like, don't get me wrong, but you know, if you're all working in service of telling a great story rather than like jockeying for who had the best pitch, you make much, much, much better stories.
Well, speaking of stories, I've got a question here from Mike that I think is interesting that I'll highlight. He says, are there specific archetypes and stories you're repeatedly drawn to?
That's interesting. Hi, Mike. Yeah, I mean, I guess I have a lot of, you know, you definitely see repeated patterns in your own work. And I've had the embarrassing experience of realizing many years later that I was writing about things that were personal to me, and I didn't realize that I was revealing anything personal. I think it's the season 2 finale of Jackie Chan Adventures. There's this thing called the Book of Shadows where all history is recorded, and to change the book is to rewrite history, is to change the past. And I was in a relationship at the time that worked a little bit like that, and I didn't really realize I was writing about that. But probably the biggest recurring theme in my work is, I guess, uncertainty. The things that tend to interest me most are things where you're never quite sure what you can actually trust, and what's going on. So there's, at the risk of confusing people, which is always a danger, but those are the things that, and then obviously there's, paranoid conspiracies and surveillance and the loss of our rights, the loss of the individual, like all of those things. But probably the biggest thing is situations. I mean, essentially, I guess I'm talking about gaslighting, stories where you're not sure if things are evil or if you're crazy. Those are some pretty big favorite themes of mine, I guess, which is a longer story.
It's interesting though, because that ties into, I think, a lot of people's lives directly, and also certainly ties into our present moment that we're living through. And I know that you and I share our politics. We share the same politics, but I always feel like there's a funny show to be done, not now, but eventually, about a White House that's like being run by a monster, like an actual monster. And like, there's a whole bunch of people that are like, what are you talking about? It's not a monster, that's Steve. And it's like, no, Steve is the monster.
Yes, I think that's the third season of Angel. There's a thing where there's Gina Torres plays this monster, and Amy Acker's the only one who can see it. I actually ripped that off a little bit for the Mother May I episode of Teen Titans. But yeah, no, you mentioned my Twitter account. I started that years ago with a really strict no politics rule. And then fascism happened. And I'm like, well, if I can scream to 9,000 people, then I'm going to do it. And, my wife is not so happy with it all the time, but I feel like I'm Howard Beale. I'm just like, that's flattering myself, frankly, because even though he was crazy, the character Howard Beale, he was brilliant in a way and eloquent in a way I don't think I am. But yeah, no, like all you can do is shout, this is wrong. This is wrong. This is not how it's supposed to be. This is not okay. And I really, really hope that we are able to change it soon, because we are looking down the barrel of how badly a mismanaged government hurts us. So that's a dark note.
But also, I feel like you're missing out on how much fun it is to drink bleach.
Oh, it's good. Yeah, I mean, I've been more on the spiced rum kind of thing lately, but we've got a good bottle of bleach. I think it's aged 7 years or something. So
it's all poison deep down.
Yeah, we'll crack it open eventually. I do have another minute if you want to do another question, because I feel like I blew past all the questions. But if we need to wrap, that's cool too. I don't mean.
No, if you're, I just want to be respectful of your time. If you're game,
I got another minute.
Cool. Well then, Tracy Nicoletti.
That was the one I was hoping you were going to pick. Yeah, that's particularly hard right now, Tracy, whether it's a personal project like a spec that you're writing or something you're working on.
Actually, you know what? I just realized this is also going to be a podcast. It's also going to be audio.
Oh.
We'll take the audio and put it up. This is another thing that our sponsorship money is allowing us to do. So for those who are listening in the future, because it will take a week or two for us to get this all done, the question is, how do you keep your own passion and interest in a project going when it goes through so many drafts? So future listener, that's
yeah, and then Paul's going to smoke his bleach. It's tough. It's tough. I've had a number of scripts over my career just kind of turn to mush in my hands, and that happens at one point or another with almost every pilot that I develop, because you get notes and there's a point where it stops being the script you created and just becomes this patchwork of notes, and it doesn't feel like anything anymore. And for what it's worth, the thing that I learned early on in kind of the rewriting process, I look for this thing that I call the spine of the story. which is not the theme, it's not the plot. It's what it feels like to be told the story. It's what the story is going to make your audience feel. If you don't know what that is, it's very hard to tell the story. When you do know what that spine is, it's like you can sort of wrap your fingers around it and shake, and everything that's not connected to the spine just falls away. In those moments when I feel like I've lost my way working on something, I will try to return to that spine, even if it's become contorted through the notes process. Try to return to the thing that was my reason for telling the story, and connect with that feeling. And that helps. And then, when they're paying you, that also helps. Nothing makes writing happen like a deadline and a check. But the less flip answer is, to be able to tell a story well, it's got to connect to something that is inside you and that is inside other people, and finding that connection, and remembering it and being able to go back to it as you lose your way, makes a big difference. So, I could go get my wife and she would tell you, like, no, every pilot that he writes, he tells me he doesn't know what he's doing and he doesn't know how to do this and he just wants to quit. So, if that's your process, you're in, I don't know, good company, medium company, but yeah,
you do have company.
I struggle. Yeah.
And I like that quote, the spine of your story, the way you want the audience to feel while they're experiencing your story. I feel like that's worth highlighting and putting on screen. I do love the nothing gets something done, like what was it, a deadline and a check?
Deadline and a check, yeah.
It's funny because I am experiencing that right now with a project where knock on wood, I just sent in the contract. I don't ever believe anything's real until there's money in the bank account.
Yep.
But I just sent in this contract and I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm really motivated to get this finished because like now I know I'm gonna get paid for it.
Yes.
But when I was at the stage where I was not getting paid for anything, I still needed to motivate myself. So I did that in reverse.
Mm-hmm.
And I sent a conservative, God love him friend, a check for $100 made out to Rand Paul's presidential campaign. And I said, I am trusting you to keep this and to not send it, to rip it up, if I send you this script that I need to write by X date. And if you do, if I don't, then I have to send Rand Paul 100 publicly disclosed dollars. And he said, this is great. And he is a good friend. And we've been friends since college. I finished the script. He ripped up the check. And Rand Paul has still never seen a dime of my money.
I would not play with that level of fire, but I respect the game. Like I thought you were just going to say you sent him a check and he was going to send you the money back when you finished it. But you took it to a very risky level. But yeah, no, that's no, I mean, spec writing is the hardest type of writing there is. No one's paying you, you're not getting notes from people who have any say in what happens with it. And a lot of the people you get notes from early in your career are just going to tell you how they would have written it. And that's really, really tricky. So, it really literally only does get easier as you get further on in your career. Not that, I mean, the thing I love about this job is every script that I work on, I'm not sure I can pull it off. Like I get bored really easily. So, not knowing for sure that I'm going to be able to do my job is an interesting challenge. Yeah, it's I'm not doing the Rand Paul thing.
All right, so when Nikki Haley runs for president,
yeah, there'll be a bunch of writers that are responsible for that. No, we can't start that.
Okay, well, I like that. This is a great. So hear me out. This is my last thought. A group of writers collectively start a pack that will either work for someone they agree with or someone that they don't, depending on if they all get their shit done. And then there's just that group responsibility. And if they do get it all done, then they can spend it on somebody that they do like.
I have a slight twist on it that you give your money to every Democratic candidate that you possibly can, and as a reward, you maybe get to keep writing whatever you want, as opposed to having people come visit you when you commit the sin of sedition. We're not quite there yet, but again, that's one of the weirdest things about this right now is like, a friend of mine worked on a zombie movie, and when this stuff first started, he was like, "This is going to happen. This is going to happen," and he's been right about all of it except for the brain eating part. But like when you deal in worst case scenarios as writers of genre do, it's really hard to realize that the truth is what actually happens is somewhere in the middle. But this is fucked up. We're like teetering both, we can't leave our houses and we have to stand in line for toilet paper. But B, like we're teetering on the edge of something impossible to contemplate. And I really, really hope that we can pull our asses back and rebuild so that we can't keep going on like this.
I hope the same. On the note of unity that we're supposed to end interviews on, I think, at least that's what I see on television. I will say that at the beginning of all this, my aforementioned conservative friend, who, in fairness to him, does not like Trump.
Yeah.
But he's one of the like, yeah, I'd vote for Biden, but not Bernie, like that kind of.
Yeah.
But he posted at the beginning of this, if I was still single, I'd just have a pile of toilet paper as my profile picture on the dating apps and let the ladies come to me. And I commented, well, I am still single. I've had that picture since well before the pandemic started, and it hasn't worked out yet. So
I made that one of my Zoom backgrounds. I got a picture of like a wall of toilet paper, and I put it behind me during meetings. I feel like it projects power and confidence.
Well, I know that you're not allowed to talk about the Writers Guild negotiations, but if you can get the studios to slip in a little TP, that would be great.
That would be great. Well, I guess that's the problem, is that it's all the industrial toilet paper that they have plenty of. It's the stuff we buy in the stores that's nicer. So the studios probably have plenty. But yeah,
we gotta negotiate the precedent, and then generations in the future can get the second and third ply.
Yeah, yeah, that's not too far off. We'll see what we can do.
Cool. Well, on that note, David, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been a real pleasure, and I hope to riff with you again in the very near future.
That'd be great. Yeah, it was absolutely great to see you and great to be on the show, and thanks everybody for watching.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you to all, and I'm going to do a few closing words before we go about our sponsors and upcoming episodes.
Take care.
You too. So I want to thank David for coming on. I also want to say that you should be tuning back in tomorrow night, because I will be interviewing a good friend of mine, Ali Schouten, who is co-EP on a whole bunch of comedy stuff. Most recently that I can talk about, Merry Happy Whatever, Netflix's Christmas show. And she and I have known each other for almost 10 years now. And whether you are interested in the shows she's worked on or not, the two of us riffing off of each other is among my favorite conversations that I ever have. So, and we often will remind each other, oh, remember that time that you said this thing that from some previous conversation, and none of us remembers the thing that we said, but it's like, oh yeah, that was funny. So anyway, come on and see us banter. And then later on in the week, we will be having the Benson sisters on Friday, and on Thursday, Tasha, I'm forgetting off the top of my head who we're having Thursday, but that's good for you to wait for while I read these quick closing words from sponsors. Jenny Klein, right, of course, I knew it was somebody huge from The Witcher. So Jenny Klein from The Witcher will be here, and if that's not an amazing week of content, I don't know what is. So thank you, as always, to our sponsors, Roadmap Writers and Notes for Execs. Roadmap Writers is an online writer education platform hosted by working industry executives. If you're looking for a real-world solution to help develop, market, and sell your script, visit roadmapwriters.com to learn more. Notes for Execs is a company that guides working entertainment executives on how to give better and more effective creative notes. Now they are opening their doors to writers as well, who can learn a lot about their own writing through the notes giving process. Visit notesforexecs.com. And now I am going to try and do one last time, or not one last time, for the first time correctly, our closing credits sequence. And hopefully you'll see closing credits, and then I will not pop back on afterwards. So here goes nothing.
Pandemic.